Nurse.org and Major League Sports teams are honoring nurses with discounted game tickets and once-in-a-lifetime experiences. From throwing the first pitch to riding the Zamboni to on-court recognition, join the fun. Visit nurse.org/nurse night to find a nurse appreciation event near you and grab your discounted tickets today. You're listening to Nurse Converse, presented by Nurse.org, a collaborative podcast amplifying diverse nurse voices. Get ready for a dose of inspiration, a sprinkle of education, and a whole lot of community.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Nurse Converse podcast. We are in our second season. My name is Carol Simpson, and I'll be your host today. I'm joined by a panel of nurses from all different generations to discuss the topic of generational diversity in the workforce, particularly in nursing. We're going to go through some fun facts and demographics from each of the generations, maybe dispel some myths, and talk about why this matters as it relates to being on a team, to leading a team from my perspective, and even to the patients that we take care of. We should also address how we drop the stereotypes, all the negativity around them, and start to think about how each individual contributes to the team, knowing that inevitably they were shaped by the generation that they were born in. We can leverage each person's life experience to add to our well-roundedness as a team. So for myself as a leader, there are up to 5 generations in the workforce, and 4 are represented here. But recently, I had somebody retire who was actually 83 years old. And so she was above the boomer generation, which is the older of the generations that we're talking about today. Pat, no offense. But we really have a cool opportunity to learn from each other, generation to generation, do some cross mentorship. Or reverse mentorship, where a younger person is mentoring somebody who's older. We can learn from what each other knows and think a lot less about stereotypes. What are the assets for each group? I've read a couple articles where people are saying we need to be done with generational titles and start to really treat everybody like individuals. We're all working toward the same goal, and I think that that's what we want to talk about today is how do we all work toward the same goal on the same teams? So I'm going to introduce who's here. The first person that's with us is Allie, and she is representing Gen Z. So Allie, if you want to just introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, my name is Allie. I have been a nurse for 5 years now. 2 of them were on the East Coast where I'm from. 2 were travel nursing, and the most current role I'm in is a float nurse at CHLA in Los Angeles.
Okay. And Jeri, everybody might recognize Jeri from Nurse Converse, one of our fellow podcast hosts. So Jeri.
Yes. Hi, my name is Jeri. I'm representing the Millennials. I have been a nurse for almost like a month shy of 13 years. And 10 of those years I was a travel nurse. So that's actually where I met the lovely Allie in one of our assignments there. But recently, about a year ago, I decided to settle down, hang up my travel shoes, and I'm also in Los Angeles at Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, and I work in the PICU there, the pediatric ICU. Also, as you heard, I'm a co-host for Nurse.org as well, and I own a business too.
And Pat, do you want to go?
Yeah, my name's Pat. I am representing the baby boomer generation, and I've been a nurse for 43 years. Had I gone to school right out of high school, I would have been a nurse much more, but I graduated when I was 37. And I went to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and had an amazing multi-dimensional career there for 35 years, retired at 70 and stayed home for a little bit, just reading the paper in the morning and realizing I didn't have enough money to travel. So I joined a private HEMONC adult practice, which is pretty close to my home. And I've been doing that per diem for the last 6 years.
Amazing. And again, my name's Carol Simpson, and I am representing Gen X. I've been a nurse for 27 years. I am currently in a leadership role in New York City, but I did meet Pat in Philadelphia. And oddly, we learned this afternoon that Allie, Jeri, Pat, and I are all pediatric oncology nurses by background, and we didn't plan that, and we didn't know that, but something brought us here together, so it's kind of cool. We're not talking about pediatric oncology, but we are going to talk about generations. So forgive me looking at my notes. Pat, I'm going to start with you. I want to read just a couple things that are in the literature about your generation and just sort of hear how this resonates with you or does not. At the end, I'm going to also just mention a stereotype about your generation. You can tell us if it's true or not, and they're not meant to be offensive at all, but they're things that I read in the literature, and I got to thinking, I don't know if that's offensive. I think it is. I think mine is. I don't know. Let's listen. So Pat, Your crew was born, debatable on some of these years, but 1945-ish to 1964, some of the things that were happening as you were coming of age with civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, activism, individualism. You were post-World War II. There were over 78 million babies born during the baby boom. Allegedly, you are disciplined, you're hardworking, you love teamwork, you're really loyal to your workplace, you value job security. Typical to have a strong work ethic, as I said, lots of personal accountability. The stereotype about your generation is that you're slow and that you cannot use technology. So just thinking through those things that you heard, does any of that resonate with you, Pat?
I think the positive attributes sound great. The negative ones, I'm not a slow walker. I'm not a slow worker. In my recent job, which, the women I work with now nurses did not know me before. And the one woman was trying to rush me one day. And I turned to her and I said, when I was your age, I could run circles around you. But I think the interesting thing when you talk about the technology, I was actually offered the position of being when we went to Epic, to be the clinical champion for oncology, because we had to actually build out the whole system. And we were sitting at the table, all of us, and I remember saying, I'm the only one at this table that actually had an inkwell at the table and wrote with a fountain pen at school. And I found that, I don't really have a problem with technology. I think because of that, because of, really creating that whole system. I will say that sometimes I think about how easy it was when I first went to CHOP to sign out a med. We had Cardexes, and all you had to do was put your initials on. Now, to sign out a med, you have to log into the computer. You have to find the patient. You have to find the med. And I do think that it takes a lot longer. And I think that's something that we all need to be aware of, about I love when we could just document face to face with the patient. So that's my experience.
I agree with that. I think everything takes longer than it used to. It's, it's actually really different. I feel like it used to be so easy, like you said, to sign out a med, or, nothing was beeping at you. Nothing failed. Your pen, I guess your pen could run out of ink, but it was like, I just put my initials next to a med, understanding all of the safety things that are in place today, but it really is different. So I'm going to read about myself. Allegedly, we were born between 1965 and 1979. There was economic uncertainty. There were tech advancements just starting. I had email by my sophomore year in college, I believe. MTV was a thing. Went back when MTV actually played music. The Berlin Wall came down. It was post-Cold War. Parents were starting to both work outside the home. And so they called us latchkey kids because we let ourselves in after work or school. Our parents were both at work. We kind of raised ourselves, like they make jokes about how we weren't allowed in the house during the summer. We could drink out of the hose. You came home at dinner and who knew where I was? I mean, both my parents were so supportive and loving, but they didn't know where I was all day for sure. I absolutely raised myself. Says that this generation embraces nonconformity and diversity, values work-life balance. They're very independent, often leaders, which makes sense if you raised yourself. Pretty self-reliant, don't love to be coached, skeptical of authority. Stereotype is that we're slackers. I don't know what I think about that. It's weird that the stereotype is you're a slacker, but many of them became leaders. I'm not sure where. I feel like the whole kind of grunge movement was a little bit wild. Maybe we were, I don't know, angry and cranky, but I don't know. I don't think slackers hits for me personally. I have a lot of really successful friends as well. So I'm going to say I don't love that one. So millennials, or Gen Y, born between 1980 and 94, although that's a really fluid moving generation as well. You guys were the first digital natives growing up with social media and smartphones. Lots of talk about kids. Everyone gets a trophy that your helicopter parents were always around you trying to keep you safe. They coached you and mentored you a lot. I hear you are the most well-educated of the generations. I know. And highly educated. I liked that. You're into inclusivity, flexibility, collaboration. You value freedom. You value flexibility. And then your stereotype again came to everybody needs a trophy and that you're really praise dependent.
Okay, that's really cool. I like hearing that because I guess I've never really sat and researched what our stereotypes are. I know for a long time we had the stereotype of entitled to, and then I feel like we'll get into that. But Gen Z came in, and now it's their stereotype. But But yeah, I think let's see what resonates with me is I really like that it touched on the fact that we're the generation that knows both before technology and after technology. Facebook came out, and like when it came out, it was meant for college students, and I was in my freshman year of college when it came out. So and so that's kind of like definitely unique to our generation in the sense that we're the only one that knows before and after as far as like the social media presence. How that affects us at work, I'm not totally sure, but that does resonate with me for sure. And then what were the stereotypes? The trophy.
Yeah,
That's
just like you
interesting.
always feel like you need to be, patted on the head or
I don't know if that resonates. I guess it's hard because I'm like, that's nice for sure. Uh, who doesn't like a little bit of that? But I don't know that I need it necessarily. So maybe there are some that feel like that. Yeah, totally.
and again, like I think the generalizations, you're always going to have, outliers, et cetera. So we're just kind of talking about what's in the
Right.
research. We're
The most
not letting it define us. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and being the most educated is really cool. That's news to me. So that's awesome.
And you are comprising the largest percentage of the workforce right now. I think slightly over my generation, but the projections are, I think you're going to make up 50% soon. So I'll link all that when I write an article about this. But yeah, I mean, thank goodness, right? You're so highly educated. So
I mean, I hope that's a lot of pressure on us millennials.
You might be taking care of Pat and me. So
we will. We'll take great care of you.
Allie's definitely going to be taking care of us.
Yeah.
So Gen Z, which I also have heard called Zoomers. I don't know if I love that because it reminds me of Zoom, but I don't know, whatever, Gen Z. And the start date for Gen Z kind of looks like 95, but then someone else said 98. And I even saw one that said 2000. But they don't know the world without the internet. Truly the most, tech savvy group. They have the best understanding of tech and social media. They're post 9/11. They have a big picture. They love the global picture. They can connect globally in a heartbeat. They have a heightened awareness of social situations. They lived through the pandemic, and that's a big not defining, but a big part of this generation. They value security and stability. They like communicating face to face. I want to hear about that, as well as Snapchat. I heard into saving and investing money, as well as traveling. And I read this group to be a pragmatic group with a very forward-thinking mindset. Allie, the stereotypes that I read were that you're anxious and sometimes entitled and a little bit less professional in the workplace with how you show up. So what do you think about those?
Let's see. So loaded.
So loaded.
I think that, well, I'll start with maybe the negatives more so. I would say that I think the stereotype of entitlement probably in a way comes from our generation knowing the respect that we deserve as people, as nurses and whatnot, and just having that ability to confidently advocate for ourselves in different situations, while other generations maybe would have kept a little bit more opinion to themselves. We're one where everything's said on the internet, everything's just spoken as is. And so that can kind of also loop into the little less like professional, a little more casual, because it is so more direct. I do agree that sometimes like there's a part of our generation that can do that some. And I do notice in myself where I am a little bit more casual with my words and maybe sometimes my attire at work and whatnot, but it's becoming the norm and our generation's kind of allowing it. So in a way, I do appreciate those things because I think that the stereotype actually is a little bit of a positive in my opinion. And then I also think like what you were saying with the face-to-face communication, that is absolutely my favorite way to communicate with people. I think that we are so used to having technology, but we're also so used to having FaceTime. We're so used to having an ability to see people's faces on screens and communicate in that way. If I'm calling somebody, my mom hates it. I'm FaceTiming her. Even when she's at work, anything, she works at the hospital too. So she's like, what are you doing out? Like we've had to make a rule now because like I just couldn't stop doing it. But I'm like, I just want to see your face, I just want to see how you're doing, She's like, I'm in the ICU working still. So I think that when it comes to receiving feedback or having conversations, like reading an email is so unengaging for me. I'm just like, I'll read those when I sit at my desk at work and I kind of have nothing else to do. Like if somebody's really wanting to have a conversation with me that's impactful, it's definitely in person. So
Wow. Okay. So your version of face to face might be FaceTime. That actually like hits for me because I see my own children talking a lot on FaceTime. They are almost 21 and almost 18, and that's totally normal for them. When I read this about face to face, I was thinking, you come to my office to talk to me, but maybe it's a mix. And interesting when you're talking about being maybe somewhat casual at work. I also remember during the pandemic, a lot of people taking class at home, right? Like they were maybe taking it in their bedroom. It was a weird time. So maybe it wasn't that strange to be like in the kind of casual mode versus somebody maybe from my generation or Pat's. Like I sometimes put on a suit for a virtual meeting and it's like, they don't even know if I have pants on. Like, what am I doing? But it just feels like, this way about like needing to present yourself really formally that maybe is a thing of the past. And I heard you're an awesome nurse, Allie, and a great communicator. Jeri really hyped you up. So, again, right? Like if you're stripping down what's important, it doesn't actually matter what you look like if you're doing a really great job. Let's stay on the communication part. So Allie just told us a little bit about how best to communicate maybe with her generation. And I feel like this comes up at work because we always wonder as leaders, how do I best get this information out there? Pat, what would you say is like the best way to communicate with people in your generation if there's an important message to throw out there?
So, as a variety, having gone through a lot of different phases at work, like I remember we never had beepers, then we had beepers, and then we had phones. So there's so many different things, but I think the one thing about nursing is you have to communicate. Like you need to communicate, like when you're off shift, like, giving report face to face. There's an overlay of when you talk about this, the generalizations, but then I think the nursing part is even different. What has nurses going into different ways? But I think nurses, we really need that communication. And right now, the area that I work, we do face to face. Because we don't have beepers. We don't, it's a small area. It's like probably the size of the downstairs. It's a 15 patient, site. And I think if I'm speaking for right now, that's what it was. But I went through the whole thing of, just phones, paging people overhead to get them, way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth in 1982. But, and then we had beepers and then we had phones. So, there have been a lot of iterations.
Hey nurses, looking for exclusive discounts? Nurse.org has you covered with deals on everything. Save big on the essentials you need to excel in your career. Don't miss out. Visit nurse.org/discounts for the latest discounts made just for you.
So if you needed some information, Jeri, and like somebody just wanted to make sure they got the right thing to you on shift, how do you prefer to get information?
I love a text. Right where we work right now, we have like text capabilities, and when I can just text a doctor, it makes my life complete. And I like don't even know like the days where I had to like other places I've worked where you have to like send a page or like even just like call them directly. I feel like such a nuisance when I have to call them directly or page them for some weird reason, even though I think it even like might go to their phone the same way. I don't know. In my mind, I'm like, I absolutely love a text. I'll do that all day. I think and I like when someone texts me too, because unless of course it's something super urgent, call me, but it's something I can like almost like file it away as of, I'll look at that in 1 second. This is priority. And it's easier for me. And I probably because I'm wondering if that's because like we were also like the generation that first started to have text. I told somebody today, I remember when it first came out and like texts were like 10 cents per text.
Yeah.
And then they lowered it to 2 cents. And then it was like,
remember that.
Oh my gosh. Because I remember like I always got in trouble because I always went over the quota. They were like, you have 100 texts a month. Now imagine.
Yeah.
No, I can't get through 100 without it in a day.
Yeah, that was like the only thing I was ever in trouble for ever. I was like, you went over your bill again because I'm like, I sent too many texts again.
I love a text, but I think I might be driven by something different for loving a text. And if it's true that my group likes to be really independent, doesn't love authority, kind of likes to be like a solo worker, that might be why I love a text. Like, you don't need to come to my office. You most certainly don't need to call me. Like, I gotcha. The text works just fine. So
it's funny because for me, I least like a text. Like I'll take it, but if I'm gonna have to text somebody, I always first thing in the morning I put the allowance on my phone for it to do a voice memo so it can record my voice and like type the words out for me, because the feeling of just like looking at my phone for like an extended period of time to like type all of this out to somebody who could just pick up their phone and talk to me. Like, I just want that fast communication. I'm like, let's get to it. Let's turn it around. Cause then like, how long is it going to take for them to respond? Read receipts are on. I'm just like sitting there waiting. So like for me, like if they need to be paged, I'm like, yes. Cause I know they have to call me back. You know what I'm saying? So I'm like, give me that pager number. I got you. And that's just my preference, which I think is kind of funny. So.
Okay.
It is
All
funny.
right. But nonetheless, right, it's something to think about because, I want to communicate with you how you want to communicate in addition to how I want to communicate. So, okay, really interesting. That one took a turn I didn't expect for it to take. Another question that I had, and this has come up in the literature a lot, is that different generations like to receive feedback different ways. And so I read something about, this generation's fine with their one performance eval at the end of the year. This generation really likes to hear, like, how am I doing? It might be every day, it might be every week. How does that resonate for you, Jeri? Like, what do you think about receiving feedback from your boss, from your peers, your friends?
Yeah, it's funny because I've been sitting here actually thinking about that since you just said that in the intro that millennials like the feedback. And I'm like, darn it, I think that that's true. Like, of course, like a yearly eval is great, but in general, like the eval is made by your manager who doesn't really work next to you. I know that I personally value so much more of course, when patients say something to me that makes my entire day. That's why we do it. I know that's probably true for everybody, but when it comes to coworkers, or managers, even I love just anything simple, even small. Just I had a manager in the ICU, and this management team has been like one of the best I've ever worked with. But they just came up and they said, "Hey, I heard last night that you were stepping in and taking and helping a lot of people when you weren't like resource, you weren't anything. I just like thank you for that. The charge, let me know." And I'm like, what was that? That's amazing. You don't hear that from like anybody. So I'm like, I guess maybe I do fit that stereotype that us millennials like that. And on that same note, I'm huge on giving that to people. I love complimenting people. I think it makes their day. I think it's positive reinforcement. So I think that I completely 100% fit that stereotype the more I think about it, because I think it's important. I think it's important to encourage each other and that you're working with.
Yeah. And showing gratitude is known to be, really healthy in the workplace and just kind of good for your soul. How about you, Allie? What do you think about getting feedback?
I'm similar to Jeri in a couple of those ways. Like it means the most to me when it is coming from a patient or their family members, because, in the end, like whatever happens in that room and the care that's provided might not always make it to a person of like authority, like your manager or anything like that. And so kind of just hearing that feedback is like the most, like, it just makes my soul warm. But I do feel like another thing is with our generation, and Jeri like definitely exemplifies that too, of just being really in the moment of giving great feedback or otherwise, like on the job in the moment. Like I feel like we just communicate pretty quickly with one another. Like if I'm in the room with somebody and they do something awesome, like I feel like even if it's not like a huge speech or anything like that, it's just cool to be like, dang, you really got that IV on your first try. Like, I'm so proud of you, because I feel like I have gotten used to the fact that management, and that's not like anything on them because they are busy with so many other things, but like, unless there is a letter written or like the parents go up to them, you're never going to receive positive feedback from your higher ups. And I rarely feel like I hear it from them as much as like my teammates and the patients themselves. So yeah.
I was sitting next to somebody who's probably in your kind of age range, Allie, and we were at a wedding rehearsal dinner, and she was on her Instagram and she was clicking like on everything. She was just going down her feed, clicking like, clicking like, clicking like. I'm like, why are you doing that? She was like, it's really important to build people up. I was like, oh, I click so many likes now. I'm like, oh gosh, like I wonder where that person is in their life. I'm going to like that. Even when I would have never formally liked it, I would have just passed by it. And so I don't know. I wonder if that's part of it, right? Like, don't tear people down, right? Like build people up. It becomes contagious.
And I feel like in the beginning of my career, I really did feel a lot of that like negative nursing like dynamic from older people. And so I really do feel like I know what it feels like to feel so down about yourself in this career, that like when there's nursing students or things like that, I'm maybe like, I try not to be like, I'm still being authentic, not like fake about it, but I'm like, what have they done well that they really have done well at that they should go home and like remember from this day? Because I really know what it feels like to only feel like you did poorly. And so just like continuing that communication style of building people up, but also being genuine with what you're saying and truthful when they maybe need some pointers.
I think you probably make a really great preceptor, which is also encouraging, because we didn't always get that kind of tenderness in precepting. We got a lot of, oh, you're lucky to be here. Don't mess up again. Or, kind of been made to feel like really crummy if something didn't go right. I can still name all of the nurses that ever kind of semi-bullied me during report. I'll tell you them later, Pat. Before we get back to that though, Pat, so like if I was giving you feedback, how do you want to receive that?
Positive or negative, either way, face to face. Like, I mean, you have to give somebody 10 or 20 positive things before they can accept the negative thing. But I remember when I got into a administrative role where I had people under me and they were not nurses. This was like towards the end of my career. I did some operation. And the first time I called one of the staff in and she looked at me, she said, "What did I do wrong?" And I said, "Whoa, why are you asking me that?" She said, "Because I've never been called in by a manager when it wasn't something wrong." I said, "Nothing's wrong."
So true.
Nothing's
wrong. That is
wrong.
so sad.
I said, "But
I get a pit in my stomach."
And the other thing, when I started in nursing, there was this thing, nurses eat their young. Now, I have to say, I never experienced that because I came into the workforce at 37 and everybody was 25. So they were nice to me, I have to say. But there was this thing. But I do remember, and I say this to a lot of anybody I've precepted. A professor at Villanova said once, "Where I am, you will be, and where you are, I've been." And that's exactly, we've all been the new nurse. We've all been the one that didn't know this or that. And we've all also been the one that we take somebody under our wing. I am a big believer in positive affirmation. Where I am now, I never leave without saying to the charge nurse, "Did a great job today," because we have a manager that's not present. And, and interesting enough, I just had a knee done. Carol knows this. It's 8 weeks ago. I had a total knee done. Yesterday was my first back to work 10-hour day. And I'm telling you, it was rough. And I can't tell you how the float nurse and the charge nurse jumped in constantly. And I sent them a text this morning. And I'm a big believer in text, by the way, especially with my grandkids.
Woo!
But but I said, I can't tell you how much I appreciate what you guys did without missing a beat. You jumped in, you supported me, you helped me. And at the end of the day, I'm so grateful for you. And I do that all the time. It's part of who I am. And I think to be a leader in nursing, you have to be that way. We also need to affirm each other every day. And, how many times does a nurse do something great for you? "Thanks for doing that. I really appreciate it." It goes a long way. It just goes a long way. Nurses can run the world. We can run the world. And I
always tell my kids that.
Firmly believe that.
I always say, if you want an answer, just ask a nurse. They're
think
resourceful as can be.
We have in the air. Think of all the attributes we have that we have to get our jobs done. I mean, I just feel that we are uniquely special people. And, I have a minor in sociology. I don't know if you knew that, Carol, but I also had this interest to say, okay, what makes a nurse want to be a NICU nurse? What makes a nurse want to be in the ED? What makes somebody want to do oncology? I always say oncology nurses can live in the gray zone. We live in the gray zone. What makes somebody want to be a surgical nurse? And I think there's a different personality that brings you into that.
Well, it sounds like every generation on this call is interested in supporting one another. And I think that's actually really important. Just to pivot, I'm thinking of something that I know, as you were talking, Pat, just about, kind of the supporting and the things that you've been through and whatever. And it got me to thinking about times that I've relied on another generation for the thing that they're good at. Mm-hmm. And I feel like with you, Pat, you're the best storyteller. You can always give a story about, whatever, the trenches when you were first a nurse, or just what it's like to be a mom when you weren't ready to have a baby and he didn't need anything. He could have slept in a basket. He only needs your love. You would always give these little pieces of advice. And I feel like that's one of the attributes of your generation is they're storytellers. They know more than us. They've lived more than us. Or when I was applying to this Nurse.org job, I sent what I was using as my application to my millennial friend, Haley. And she was like, no, give me till the end of the day. And she rebranded everything and it was amazing. I'm like, how did you do this? So is there something you can think of where you relied on a generation that's kind of you relied on them for exactly what they alleged to be good at, and it really panned out for you. Do you have something like that, Jeri? I see you shaking your head.
I mean, I'm thinking of so many things for sure. I know that there's been, and I feel like Allie it's a perfect example. Like when we have teenage patients, I feel like the closer they are to, and I still feel like I can still get away with some of it, but I am getting older, and I feel like it's the younger nurses that can connect with them on a level because they're closer in age. And that's for teenagers specifically, that's very important because they want to know someone's like them. They want to feel the same as other people and that someone closer to them understands them. So that's huge. I also think that something that I rely on or especially at the start of my career, I'm getting more comfortable in my own skin, as you go through. But at the beginning, I just remember being like in awe of the older generations and how they were so good at managing chaos in the most calm way, like advocacy that they show, how to properly advocate for their patients to physicians when the patient is going downhill. Still to this day, there's a charge nurse that I work with now that when I see her in motion in the way I don't know how old she is, I guess, but she would probably be in between Gen X and Boomer possibly, but it's just, I still am in awe of her and like the things that she can get done in such a short amount of time. Using everyone's strengths is like really important.
Yeah. Yeah. How about you, Allie? Do you have any examples?
Oh gosh, yes. I feel like I go to your generation, Carol, when I need help, like getting my voice heard. I do love my generation, and even the one above me, like I feel it could kind of help with this, millennials. But I feel like with your generation, it's like you've been there long enough to really gain this level of respect, and you're just like really quick to help advocate for the younger nurses. So like if I'm reaching out to a team to get help, or like if I feel like a patient's going the wrong way, I feel like simply due to the fact of like the higher years of experience and just your ability to communicate so like to the point, I've always reached out to those nurses for help when I'm feeling like I'm in a really like uncomfortable situation. And I feel like with millennials, like they're right above us, so they're a lot more like relatable. If I feel like, am I making a mistake, or like did I just do something wrong? Like you have more experience than me than like my generation does, but like I feel like you won't be mad, like a little like less judgmental. So I'm like, before I go do something about it, like I just really lean on them in that way. And then with Pat's generation, I've worked with some nurses that are incredible with some of the stories they tell, especially on a unit I worked on as a travel nurse, and the infectious disease stories that she was telling me, especially with kind of the change in the narrative right now with like vaccinations and whatnot. It's just so fascinating to hear her talk about when those were like coming out, and like her feelings about how things are kind of taking this shift again and taking care of like HIV and AIDS patients and the progression with TB patients. It's just amazing. Like y'all need to write a book about your careers, like so that we can always remember what was before us, because some of those things just like are kind of dissipating. So yeah.
That's so cool. Pat, how about you? Do you have a time that you relied on another generation, even if it's above you?
It's interesting because now when I went to get this per diem job, which is adult hemonc, well, what I knew about adults, you could fit on the head of a pin. It was only basically my mother, my relatives. I strictly knew about kids. I didn't know about. And so I had to rely on my preceptor when I first went. She was one of the best nurses I ever worked with her. Brittany, she was probably 24, 5. And, she's teaching me, she's orienting me and treating me like not like that. I mean, literally like not like a dope. Adults have different diseases. And I have had to be like, just yesterday, I couldn't remember which chemo went first. And I went to one of the younger nurses. I'm like, I just can't remember. And she reminded me, and I said, don't think she said, no, you're fine. I mean, they treat me like a diamond. I mean, they won't let me get on a stool. They're so solicitous, and they always give me the hardest patients because I can usually deal with them. But in terms of their skill level and what they know, probably they know way more than me, because I never really did adults. I didn't do inpatient, but I go to them a lot, and I have no problem saying, can you guys help me with this? And they're great. There's such an appreciation in our group right now for what they say to me sometimes. When you're here, there's a different vibe. which I think is
that's
interesting.
really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, because tone setting matters. But then you're also describing this like reverse mentorship,
Yes,
right? Like
absolutely.
you can ask a 24-year-old a question, and that's part of like dropping your ego and thinking like, what does the patient need?
I had
like, who
zero
cares
ego.
about me?
I think that's the whole thing. Like, as I said, there's lots of things we don't know, and we're never going to know everything. And there's always an expert. We've all been there. We've all been that new nurse. So I think this just always remembering that. But yeah.
In conclusion, this has been such a great team. We might need a part 2 because I feel like I still have so many more notes. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the future.
Thanks for joining Nurse Converse, brought to you by Nurse.org. Help us grow by leaving a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Nurse.org supports nurses with career and education tips, life advice, and breaking news. Thank you for all you do and for being you.